If you've been a parent, then you'll understand what I'm about to describe. Your baby is born, and you experience this explosion of joy at the birth of your child. A day later, you are discharged. You and your spouse go home with a new member of your family. You settle in, and then at one point, you hear the sound. And so you look at each other and you're like, what language is this? Well, today I'm here to share with you what I've learned from years of studying infants' cries. And I assure you that there is a method to their madness, most of the time. So the first time I wondered what the infant cry could mean was in the year 2010. This was during an internship in Nigeria. I was studying electrical engineering, and my boss's wife had just had a baby. As I was quite close to the family, I went to visit them. My boss and I were sitting on the balcony, he was carrying the baby, and all of a sudden she begins to cry. And he did all he could to calm her, but she wasn't having it. Then the mom comes and says, oh, she's tired, she wants to sleep, and takes her away. And my boss was livid. He was like, how come only my wife gets to understand them? And then he turns to me and said, Charles, go and build an app for this. And I thought it was a fascinating idea, an app to interpret what your baby is trying to say. But I had no idea if this was possible. And so I began to talk to clinicians. I began to read a bit more about the physiology of cry production. And what I learned truly got my attention. You see, crying in newborns is essentially an involuntary action that is directly coordinated by the central nervous system. And what this means basically is that the crying patterns change depending on the need, but also depending on the health state of the baby. As adults, when we are sick, you can say, my head hurts, or my stomach hurts, etc. But infants haven't developed language, or at least in the way we have. And their cry is essentially their only means of communicating to the world. When they are hungry, they cry. When they have a full diaper, they cry. When they are sick, they cry. So, in other words, there was a potential to automatically interpret infants' needs and health from their cries. And for me, this was music to my ears because before starting engineering school, I had initially gone for medicine, which I loved. But then I switched back to math because I couldn't think of a world without math. And so here was a golden opportunity for me to effectively apply math in medicine, in a way that could fundamentally change the way we communicate with babies. So several years later, my interest in this topic led me to pursue a PhD in AI at McGill here in Montreal. And I wanted to basically learn more about the theory of AI and also learn how to conduct scientific research to tackle this problem. So it was while at McGill that I launched the Ubenwa project. We were a small team of AI and clinical scientists, and our goal was to investigate the nature of the infant cry, to find out if it was truly possible to identify their needs and also their health via analysis of the patterns. We were also interested in how infants' cries change from one part of the world to another. And so we ended up partnering with neonatologists in 5 children's hospitals across 3 continents, in North America, South America, and in Africa, to conduct a large-scale clinical study that we called the Ubenwa study. And for context, Ubenwa in my mother tongue means the cry of a baby. So let me walk you through what we've learned so far. To address the first question, we basically recorded babies crying due to different triggers. So think pain, hunger, discomfort, etc. And then we analyzed the acoustic characteristics in each of these cases. So we're looking at things like the pitch of the cry, the rhythm, the melody, glides. And what we found was there were several consistent changes in the cry characteristics. For example, pain cries tend to have high intensity, high pitches. And I have an example here to illustrate this for you. So we'll do a quick quiz, everyone. to see if you can actually identify a hunger versus a pain cry. So here is sample one. And sample two. So if you think sample one is a pain cry, hands up. Okay, one person. If you think sample two is a pain cry, hands up. Okay, the majority has it. Okay, so correct. You've all certified as baby whisperers, except you. Yes, so please register to join our lab afterwards. Well, I guess you could basically hear that soul-piercing scream in the second one. You know, that's the kind of high pitch that basically defines pain cries. And as a parent, if you've been one, you'll recall that after several months, you actually begin to identify these kinds of patterns in your baby's cries. And you know how alarmed to be when they actually cry. And so we basically went further to apply the same method to attempt to distinguish between healthy and sick babies. In this case, babies that were at risk of brain injury. And again, we found some consistent changes. For instance, sick babies tend to exhibit the flat melody type more often, as opposed to the rising, falling patterns we see in healthy ones. And you can see this in the frequency representation of the cries on the screen. So in summary, our AI system turned out to be over 90% accurate in identifying babies at risk of brain injury. And it's really worth emphasizing the significance of this, because the only thing the AI had access to was the sound of the baby's cry. And so you can imagine several applications of this technology. You know, at home, it could help parents know when the cry is for something more serious than just the regular needs. In remote clinic, it could be used for rapid screening and referral to make sure we save lives. And then the last thing we looked at was actually the question of whether the baby's cries differ by geography or cultures. So, will the Nigerian baby sound different from a Canadian baby? And in this graph, I show, each dot basically represents the cry of a baby from one of three countries: Canada, Brazil, and Nigeria. And we show it across two axes, the pitch and the tempo, which are two defining characteristics of sound. And what you see is that the cries are distributed in a similar fashion from country to country. And if you just zoomed into one of those set of dots, you wouldn't be able to say which country is which. You know, we did the same experiment across several features of cries, and even tried to train an AI system to identify the baby's cries by just the country. And this was not possible for us. So the question is, why is this the case? Well, we believe it comes down to the fact that at the newborn stage, the infant cry is basically this universal language. You know, infants don't have voluntary control over it, and the environment hasn't yet influenced their speech patterns. And what this does is basically allow us to build systems that work for babies everywhere in the world. So, I've talked a bit about the research, but we've actually already begun to put this to practice. And parents really love it. So earlier this year, we launched a mobile app called Nanny AI. It's basically a non-medical solution to help parents to understand why the baby is crying and receive actionable recommendations. So it's really simple. You record a cry, it analyzes it, it gives you the detailed reasons for the cries, characteristics, and you can even give it feedback as well. And interestingly too, we've seen that the users of the app have spanned nearly every single country in the world, almost 200 countries. So I called my boss recently, by the way, and I told him, hey, we've actually built this app that can translate baby's cries. And he told me, Charles, you are 14 years late. But if you have an app that can help me understand teenagers, I'll pay for that one. So, to conclude, the rate of infant mortality today is still unreasonably high. Every year, over 2 million babies die or end up with disabilities lifelong due to potentially preventable medical conditions. What cry analysis offers us is basically an opportunity to identify critical issues early and refer babies for potentially life-saving treatment. So our vision is really a world in which cry analysis becomes a standardized assessment that's given to every newborn in the world similar to a hearing test. And when we get there, then I'll know that we've been successful in giving voice to the precious little humans in our lives. Thank you.